Okay, so we're very excited to be here at Secure Connections. I've got a panel of experts that are here to share their experience in managing IoT risks in one of the largest networking enterprises in the world. Okay, Robert Holden leads the technical direction for IoT cellular requirements across both network and device for AT&T. And additionally, he works on the requirements for certification of IoT modules and devices for AT&T. So, Robert, can you tell us a little bit more about your involvement in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as well as managing AT&T and FirstNet certification requirements for acceptance on the AT&T network, I also have a role as the chairman of PCIB certification organization group, leading the operator group and the IoT working groups there, ensuring that they are delivering certification requirements to achieve network acceptance. And then I also sit within the GSMA IoT 5G working group to ensure that we have the right directional setting within the industry for what we want to see from the network.
Okay. And next I'd like to introduce Vadim Nerovnia, who's a security architect and a practitioner in the AT&T CSO team. Now, Vadim's primary work is in the security assessment of IoT modules and solutions that are used both in the company and we provide to customers. So, Vadim, can you tell us a little bit more about that work and how you're seeing trends in that work?
Yeah, sure. There is growth in entire IoT segment, and just to give you an idea, there are estimated about 20 billion, with a B, 20 billion devices, IoT devices out there right now. Now, in comparison, just to kind of give you a sense of what it means, there are only 8 billion people on planet Earth. So right now, basically, we have 2.5 IoT devices per living person. So just to give you a scale a little bit. So what we do, what I'm doing in AT&T, what my team is doing, is that we are evaluating IoT devices. We're doing a security assessment of IoT devices that are being used by our customers, as well as IoT solutions and IoT devices that we are using internally at AT&T.
Okay, and finally, but not last, I'd like you to meet Jay Ramachandran, who's had a broad range of security roles in the company for over 30 years. Jay's currently a security architect in AT&T CSO with a special interest in IoT. So, Jay, can you give us a little bit more about yourself and your ideas about the taxonomy of IoT devices?
Sure. I've been working around security for a long time, and IoT has been an area of interest. One of the challenges with IoT is that there's a lot of diversity in what is an IoT device. And you can see some examples right here. A taxonomy basically allows you to classify problems. And IoT devices have different hardware capabilities. They have different networking technologies, protocols, and use cases. And one of the things that you'll see over here is that if you deploy an IoT device, you have to do the care and feeding for its entire life cycle. And I see that here are a couple. Robert, would you like to speak to those two, Robert and Vadim?
Okay, so what I want to talk about next is IoT. We've mentioned IoT about a half a dozen times without really defining it. So, Robert, you have an IoT-enabled helmet. Vadim, you have a connected cane that's IoT-enabled. And Jay, you came with, what did you come with? Nothing?
Right here. Come on down. This is my IoT example, and as you can see, there's a wide range of things that are IoT devices. Sit, boy.
Okay. So, Vadim, you work with a wide range of IoT devices. How would you define IoT devices for the audience here?
Well, that's a loaded question. I think even NIST and FCC, they don't seem to have an agreement of what IoT device is, because each of the organizations have their own definition of IoT device, should be or could be. So IoT devices, they span across multiple domains, and I think I can give you an example. For example, I think this cane, I think this is primarily in healthcare domain. Now, this doggy, I would say, is actually an industrial control systems device. So, so they're in different domains, but both of them are essentially IoT devices.
And really, when you look at IoT, I mean, it is the Internet of Things. You have everything within there. I think one easy way to be able to break down IoT and at least grasp a portion of it is you have two main segments. One is consumer IoT, the other one is enterprise IoT.
Okay, so today let's focus on IoT in the enterprise market. So Jay, why is enterprise IoT security such a hot topic now? Why are we here?
In the enterprise, companies basically deploy IoT devices for a wide range of use cases, and the requirements around security across all of that spectrum of verticals very often is the same. They have the same CIA triad of requiring confidentiality, integrity, authentication, authorization, accounting. But because IoT devices don't fit into the same mold as the regular IT devices, the differences manifest risk. Essentially, you can't use the same thinking to address the same problems. You do need to have additional ways of planning and generating policy and controls for them.
Yes, absolutely. And IoT security is an expanding domain of IT security, just because the devices are so different, and those devices are using wide range of connected technologies,
Yep.
Which makes them in many ways more vulnerable to an attack. There is another thing, and I wanted to ask maybe the audience, what do you think is an average life cycle of an IoT device? Any ideas?
12 years.
Well, yeah, that's close. So it is 10 years. What it means? Does it mean that every device is going to get replaced after 10 years? Not really. I think what we have is we have devices that are being replaced maybe after 1 or 2 years, and we have devices that are replaced once in 20 years or never. So, and this creates lots of unique risks for IoT devices, especially when we're talking about scale of those devices, when you have 10, 20, 30,000 devices on the network.
And one of the key ways in which you can protect those devices on the network, obviously, is a cellular-first environment. And I'm not just saying this because we're a network operator. Obviously, we are, and it's kind of an important thing. But cellular-first in the IoT space allows a number of things to happen. One, you can bring in a custom APN. You can bring in an IP security tunnel. You can have end-to-end encryption. With those items, you can actually have a solution that doesn't actually touch the public internet. You can have secure data that goes from the IoT device to your back-end enterprise, remaining completely, mostly secure all the way through. Certainly reduces the number of attack vectors.
Okay. So we've established that enterprise IoT security is a little bit different than IoT. So how can enterprise IoT risk management be introduced into an enterprise for our audience, and what would you like to say about that?
One of the things you need to do is you have to an IoT-specific policy and build controls around it. The differences in technology will very often drive that. The fact that you have multiple ways of connecting to a device, you have layers between your IT network and the device itself through gateways or other technologies, it's a challenge.
Yes, it is. And when we're talking about industry standards and frameworks, so at some point I was evaluating a landscape of IoT standards, and I counted about 100 of them before I really lost count. It was because there are so many of them for a reason. Again, we are talking about devices being very different, and not a single certification or framework, security framework, is able to basically cover it all. In many cases, we are talking about certification being done specifically for certain chipsets that are being used with IoT devices. In other cases, we are talking about certification being done in terms of connectivity. So, and this is something that is driving, number of those certifications, very high. And of course, I already mentioned different domains, because in each certification, you're looking for a specific things to enforce, to make sure that they are working right. So, and since we have different domains, it's going to be different for every device. So this is why we have so many industry standards. This is why we have so many associations related to IoT devices, just because of difference between them.
Right. So where can enterprises get IoT-specific policy templates and standards? I'm sure national and regional and global considerations come into play. But any comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, as Vadim just mentioned just now, there's a lot of places to get requirements in terms of understanding security for your IoT device or solution. If you look out there, there's some solutions out there from NIST, from CTIA, from GSMA, ETSI, UL. My brother probably has one. I don't know. Everyone's got their own set of requirements. And I think when you look at all of those, there's a lot of scalability in a lot of areas they can focus in. As Vadim said, that they focus on different areas, different solutions. I think it's very difficult to find the right solution for every problem out there. And so a lot of the security scopes actually adjust based on what they're being presented with. So a lot of the requirements out there are guidelines more than actual exact requirements. Also, if you give exact requirements, you give the perhaps solutions on how to work around them. I think another area where we worked specifically on this is AT&T actually developed our own security requirements, the IoT device security requirements document. We actually use that today to assess our own devices against.
Yes, and let me add to it. If your organization doesn't have an IoT-specific policy, I think NIST is a good place to check because they recently developed a set of guidelines and requirements specifically for enterprises, specifically for device manufacturers, specifically for federal government. So all this information is available.
And if you want to learn more, you can come talk to us at the networking session later on today.
Okay, so the security lifecycle starts with the permit to operate as part of the onboarding process. So tell us more about the industry and regulatory trends. I've been involved in some. Like most recently, the AUVSI has some standardized criteria for cybersecurity policy in uncrewed vehicles. This is kind of an example of an uncrewed vehicle here that requires cybersecurity treatment. And another example is I've recently worked with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration to develop connected car cybersecurity certification standards for practitioners in the network, because it is very different than the IT, the typical IT domain. Okay, so any comments on where those kinds of efforts are headed?
Well, I mean, from a perspective of regulatory environment, it's definitely changing, and I would say that it's changing in the right direction. So I would like to mention Federal Trust Mark. This is something that was initiated by White House about 2-3 years ago. And so far, this labeling initiative, Trust Mark, is only going to apply to consumer devices. But you can see that this is where regulation could be only starting. So it doesn't apply to enterprise environment. It is not mandatory or anything like that. But certainly there are changes that are happening in these regulations.
And then, as Vadim said, that trust mark is focused on the consumer space. It actually kind of serves as a health label for a product, so a consumer can understand kind of what assessments have been made on that device to make sure that that consumer's data is going to be held secure. It is potentially a matter of time before we start to see similar activities in the enterprise space, so more enterprise security mandates coming down the line.
The way that those standards came up is really the model. You have a public-private academic partnership where you have different perspectives on how to solve the problem of saying, here's a manufacturer, they built a thing, and we need to basically have an understanding of the security properties of that thing. And because IoT devices, once deployed, don't change very often, how do you basically see if that trust mark tracks over time, the life cycle of the device? Is everything you know about that device still true? So essentially, when it comes to regulation and law, we can't just have mandates coming from the government without understanding of the use cases that enterprises put devices to. The regulations need to match our needs. They need to be the best possible regulations in the sense that they shouldn't impact business requirements. We still need to basically do the use cases, implement the use cases. I think he wants you to add to this.
You should train your dog better, Jay.
I think he wants you to add something.
So, Robert, can you...
Robert, jump in and help me here.
Yeah, tell us about FirstNet.
I'm sorry.
Jay's having a little bit of trouble because the dog wants to talk about FirstNet.
Yes.
And so, obviously, it's an area where AT&T have actually enforced some requirements in terms of FirstNet Trusted as a new mark that actually AT&T introduced, where we take IoT devices that are looking to achieve the FirstNet Trusted mark. They go through the AT&T IoT device security requirements. Our security team, which is part of what Vadim here is part of, they will actually take that device, they'll do penetration testing on it, they'll try and break the device down, look for hardware and software attack vectors.
Yeah, and this I see
He
succeed
likes
in many cases. Yes,
Yeah.
break it
And-
down.
And so it's very much something where we will actively try and make sure that device is secure for our customers.
Yeah, and risks associated with those devices are very different. Those devices, as I think we know, they're often not able to protect themselves. But when we are introducing regulations, where we're introducing certifications, this is certainly something that is tremendously reducing the risk of implementation of those devices. That's one thing. Second thing, we do it before implementing it into production. Which is, when we're talking about scale, that matters. So in some cases, in certain situations, it's not possible to make changes to devices that were already deployed. Firmware may not, change, maybe some architecture of the solutions that has to be verified prior to letting those devices to go into production. And when we're doing that, we're basically raising trust in those devices. And when we are raising trust, we're raising acceptance of those devices internally and by our customers.
Yeah. And just to add to that, when you look at what certification adds as a layer, you don't depend on the third party who manufactured the device to explain to you what its capabilities are. You have you as an enterprise stepping in and saying, my customers need more. And that's basically essentially something that you can deliver when you have thought about your own certification program.
So you've explained that IoT devices have very specialized architectures and they're specialized controls for security. Can you tell us any more about how our customers their enterprises can gauge their maturity along that pathway?
It's a bit of a challenge. Essentially, when you're looking at deciding which devices to deploy, deploying them, identifying those devices on the network, accessing them, managing them, authenticating to them, all of these things are the same activities that you expect in an IT environment, but you need to think about the network policy for those devices differently and the controls as well.
Yeah, and there are IoT tools available, tools that are specific to IoT devices that help identify those devices on the network, that help to enforce policy for those devices, and that policy could be custom to a given device. So other ways to secure the devices on the network would be network fragmentation. For example, you can always place IoT devices on a VLAN that is separate from your main enterprise network. That would provide tremendous deal of security. Now, in my work, I often deal with BMS devices. These are built-in control systems. And some of the protocols that were developed for built-in control systems, they were developed pretty much before the internet.
Yeah,
And
like back in my day.
Yeah. so I mean, and replacing those devices is not cheap. And one of the ways to secure them is to place them behind a secure gateway. So in this case, you're greatly reducing risk of anyone being able to reach the device out from another network, out from the internet. So, the security gateway would provide the protection.
And again, that's the place where we talk about cellular first connectivity, in that not only can you put it behind a gateway, but you can also put it into a private IP tunnel behind a private APN, removing the ability for people to be able to take malicious control of that device or your assets within that building, for example.
Yeah, now,
Yes.
Jay, as part of the process, you had mentioned a sequence of steps to gauge maturity, and the first one was inventory or asset discovery.
The first one's the hardest one. When you decide to deploy IoT devices, one of the challenges is to know what's on your network. So you might have a way of accepting a particular device for deployment, but it becomes a database problem. And with databases, you always have a data quality problem. What devices did you decide to deploy? Which ones can you see on your network? Which ones can't you see? They might be in your database, but your discovery doesn't find them. And lastly, the worst case, what rogue devices can you see on your network? So essentially, IoT has built into it this issue of asset discovery, the ability to find devices, and that's a big challenge. There's many, many different ways you can basically spider through a network to find things that are there. And devices sometimes, they spoof other devices in order to hide. So it's a bigger challenge than most people recognize. As Vadim mentioned, because the protocols and the skill sets are different, it's a smaller pool of cybersecurity talent as well.
And not to be too much of a broken record, but cellular can help there again as well, because you get a couple of identifying marks with cellular.
Yes.
You get an IMEI and an IMSI that'll be unique to every device. So you have an addressable item.
Yeah, and myself, what I noticed is that cellular first is becoming a trend. It is in the past it was like a device that you would receive, like a consumer device that you would have at home. You would expect this device to use Wi-Fi. Now this is changing, and it's changing rapidly. Devices that I have at home actually no longer on my network. They are remaining on cellular network with Wi-Fi being as a backup network.
Yeah.
So unless that device has to push tremendous amount of data, it doesn't really have to be on Wi-Fi network. It is better to be on cellular network, which is separate from your home network, and this way it's much more secure.
Yep.
Okay. So let's take a chance and see if we're right here. Is for our enterprise customers in the audience, is there anybody that feels they have a good inventory or a database, whether it's automated or even a spreadsheet?
Everything that's on
identifies their
cellular,
IoT
everything that's on IP,
devices on their
Wi-Fi,
networks?
everything that's on LoRaWAN and Sigfox, and you guys know that, right?
Yeah, is there anybody?
Big fat database with all that information.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it would have been great to see a few hands, but so this is part of the journey that a lot of enterprises are on. Okay. So
Jay's going to come count them for you.
so appreciate that. Okay. So any specific stories you guys anything you want to share about exploits?
Well, there's a couple I've read about in the mail. I'll have the two experts discuss it. There's the water hack in Texas. There was a power grid attack in Europe a few years back, and there's the very famous attack of a Jeep. You guys want to talk about those?
Yeah, if you Google on YouTube, you can find a picture of a Jeep that's being driven off the side of the road. And that's a wireless
With a journalist
attack.
inside, which is why it's very famous.
So the Jeep example, it was not AT&T's network. It was Sprint's network, and they actually had a bad network design at the time. They had peer-to-peer networking available, so you could actually talk from vehicle to vehicle without going through the core network. So they actually bypassed all the inherent network security. So when you see that Jeep example and people ask, well, why would I put cellular in this? That's not a typical example and not something you should really expect to see. Certainly not how AT&T would see devices deployed.
Yeah, exactly. And this is tells us once again that when it comes to deployment of IoT devices, security is not optional. Security due diligence is not optional neither. So that's all these three cases are pretty much result of security being maybe not at the highest level.
And you have things like the Mirai botnet, which was built from devices with default credentials. That's a very simple example of bad security practice. Tens of thousands of devices were taken over, and then there were DDoS attacks against Dyn, against Krebs, against other people. So it's a real challenge.
Okay. So what we've talked about is IoT. Enterprise IoT is a growing risk domain that everybody, I think, can agree, because they didn't raise their hands, has some work to do in that area. And if we can translate that risk into actual cost for enterprises. Because the whole purpose of IoT is to aid in our efforts to continually automate and reduce costs. If you can't deploy IoT devices safely on your networks and in your enterprises, you're not going to be able to be competitive. So it's a really important topic. And with that, I think we'd like to take some questions if there are any.
So gentlemen, y'all brought some props up here today, and I don't think they're props, I think they're actual things. Can y'all talk a little bit about the helmet and the cane, and then obviously we'll talk about the dog here in a second, but let's talk about the helmet and the cane first.
Well, I can start with the cane. So I'm not an expert on this device, but
Okay.
this cane is really something that my elderly parents could take, could have a good use. So this device is actually is able to use AI to identify a fall.
Oh, wow.
It has a phone built in as well. So it has a tracker built in as well.
We've come
So
a long
you
ways
get-
from I've fallen and I can't get up, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's
go.
just improved version of it.
Yeah.
And I think it could come handy for many people.
Absolutely, that's fantastic. And let's talk about the helmet.
So the helmet, this is actually a helmet that was designed for high school football team. There is a display in here. So it's actually intended for a sportsman who was actually deaf. He was the quarterback. He could not hear the commands coming from the coach. And so it's got a heads-up display. They're actually, commands are punched into the terminal, and they actually feed up onto his heads-up display, and he can actually see what the play is going to be. So it gives him real-time access to what the play is going to be, how he's going to do it, as well as it's got other things in there for fall detection, for concussion detection, and various other things to understand if they take a hit, how bad that hit is.
And I watch a lot of college football, so I've seen our commercials where it looks like we have an entire school using those.
Gauntlet is using it.
Yeah, it's
That's
fantastic.
exactly right.
You guys heard a little bit about the dog during the FirstNet presentation. This is one of our robot dogs. We use it in the environments that were described in that, essentially when you have an emergency response and you need to do things like search and rescue. But we have our expert on the robot dog here. That's Arthur Hernandez. You definitely need to talk to him during the networking session. He can describe all the other use cases about protecting facilities and asking about the up-armored version that the military uses.
Yeah. Can you expand a little bit on how you're involved
Arthur,
with
tell us
beyond
about
just the dogs, but actually drone activities for AT&T, which are IoT devices?
Sure. Arthur Hernandez, I'm the operations lead for all things drones and robotics with AT&T. So we use the dog for a variety of different things. One of the things we do is perimeter and flight line security. So we walk around military installations or enterprise level customers, and we provide that security level where we're using the embedded cameras that are in there and providing some type of video intelligence solution for our customers, so we can track, detect, we can see various different things that are going on those type of bases or facilities. We also incorporate the dog into like search and rescue scenarios where we're looking for people that are under rubble. We're looking for people under mud or whatever, whether they're alive or not alive. We also use the dog for school safety. So that's kind of like looking for different types of drugs like fentanyl, marijuana, cocaine. We also do gas detection as well, so carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide. We can do air sampling and such. So the list is limitless when it comes to what we do with the robotic dog.
And Arthur, how
as
fast
opposed
does
to
it run?
drone, huh?
How fast does it run?
The dog runs about 7 miles an hour. So typically the human runs about 5 to 6. So I can definitely chase a human down. So
I was
that's
told it
pretty
might
good.
swim too. Does it swim?
The dog does swim. We've used the dog over different ravines, small bodies, small lakes. Obviously, I can't swim over the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic, all right? But I can walk underwater up to about 2 meters. So, and then just to kind of button up everything with drones. So we use drones, whether they're tethered or untethered, and we're providing cellular bubbles for our tethered solution. And then obviously we're doing like different types of medicine delivery or, material delivery when it comes to our untethered drones. And one more thing, the robotic dog also does object recognition, meaning we can look for weapons, guns, and things like that for school safety. So.
And the rumor is all these devices are going to be at the networking reception tonight too.
That is correct. So all these devices will be there. So.
Awesome. Y'all can check them out there.
Okay. And one of the key things, the takeaway point, these are kind of exciting, kind of interesting eye candy for the audience. But IoT devices are everywhere. As Vadim mentioned, there's how many billions of devices?
20 billion
that you
estimated, of
personally
course, nobody
count?
really counted, but it's 20 billion.
Okay, billions of devices. They're all out there. They're in our enterprises. One of the issues with security is we often don't even know they're on our networks. They're plugged in, and as an industry, we have to develop a consistent framework and a policy where onboarding and security becomes second nature, becomes automatic and not a manual process that's easily overlooked. So we need all the steps that these experts have discussed, and I think we're all set.
It is. Thank you, gents. I appreciate your time. So, folks, we are going to roll into another break. After that break, we'll have a group of cybersecurity visionaries coming up to talk about security policies and other things. So, look forward to seeing y'all back at 3:15.